Welcome to our BLC Digital Studios here in Tysons, Virginia. I'm Seth Berenzweig, the managing partner of Berenzweig Leonard, and I am pleased to be here in studio today with our friend Rachel Platt. Rachel, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
You bet. We're delighted to have Rachel from PLATTinum Consulting here to talk about a fascinating topic, HR strategies in challenging times. Rachel, we're really happy to have you here for the conversation. Tell us a bit about yourself and about PLATTinum Consulting.
Sure. So my background, more than 20 years in corporate HR. 8 years ago, I started PLATTinum really to focus on people strategy, moving beyond the day-to-day compliance and really moving into the programmatic aspects of how organizations create culture, build future leaders, grow their organizations to be more profitable, higher productivity, and just a better place for people to work.
Fantastic. Well, we're delighted to have you here to talk about HR strategies in challenging times. So let's just bust right on into it. I'd like to start by talking about the topic of DEI and change management. We know a lot about DEI. We've heard a lot about DEI. We've had a series of executive orders recently from the White House that directly pertains to this issue. Interestingly, about 24 hours ago, we also got a U.S. Supreme Court decision that is generally related to this topic because they confirmed and ruled in a unanimous 9-0 decision that allegations of reverse discrimination do constitute unlawful race discrimination, unlawful employment discrimination under the Civil Rights Act, which from a DEI standpoint really indirectly puts another nail in the DEI coffin. But talk to us about the topic of DEI as it relates to change management.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's so interesting right now is DEI, the word or the letters DEI, gives people a visceral reaction. But what I don't think has changed in most organizations is the knowledge that every day your leaders have the power to be the reason why someone feels included, valued, appreciated. And so making sure that we are giving non-preferential treatment. You know, people are scared, they're concerned, they're looking at their policies that are written and, frankly, their unwritten practices as well to make sure that they're in compliance. But smart organizations have and will continue to be baking their values into all of the work that they're doing. It doesn't, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, should be a core part of a business strategy. Research shows that organizations that represent, that their employees represent their communities, the communities that they serve, are more profitable. They are more successful. And so finding appropriate and legal ways, not by numbers, not by quotas, but by ensuring that you are creating the environment where you have true diversity of thought, diversity of backgrounds, diversity of thought, not because you can count the number of people, really to me should be embedded in all parts of an organization.
You know, you raise an interesting point because it seems to me that when you're talking about this topic, companies are sort of walking a tightrope. They want to have a diverse workforce. They want to have a rich culture, but given the executive orders, and the things that are occurring right now, particularly in the federal space, but frankly in across
Impacting all of
America,
us.
there are and what we're recommending to companies is to consider an audit relative to going into the policies, the handbooks, the procedures, because when a government contractor, for example, certifies that they are in compliance with federal law, that means that they are affirmatively certifying that they are not running askance from any of these requirements. And if there are any vestiges of elements within those documents that talk about pursuing affirmative diversity or something of that nature, it could ultimately even trigger a violation of the False Claims Act. So we're not trying to give people reasons to lose their minds or not be able to sleep at night, but you know, the impact of DEI has really had an interesting impact on really needing to reflect back and look at your documents to make sure that you don't run into those kinds of headwinds.
I agree. But it is more than just like a find and replace. And looking at, yes, your policies, yes, your training manuals, your hiring, your promotional practices. I mean, all of that, and not creating explicit or implicit preferences or exclusions, I think is really critical. But keeping in mind your values, if they are your values, of respect, fairness, inclusion, just professional growth.
Yeah.
There are ways to do that. And if organizations need to change the language that they are using so that they stay on the right side of the line, compliant, okay, then do that. But that doesn't mean that organizations are giving up their values.
Yeah, don't leave your values at the door.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's about standing up for what your organization believes, and absolutely doing an audit so that you don't fall on the wrong side. And it's not just, I mean, I remind my clients, it actually should not just be about what is written down. You really have to think about what the unwritten practices are in an organization, how decisions get made, who's in the room when those decisions get made.
Right.
That's where doing real inclusive work comes from.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance, and we're seeing why it's so important to have the element that you're talking about from HR best practices standpoint really interwoven with the legal considerations. It makes so much sense, and to make sure that you don't have, you know, a stripped down robotic approach, you have to keep the human element in there.
Yes.
So let's talk about HR fallout and work reductions in the age of DOGE. DOGE is another one of our favorite acronyms that is now with us. DOGE is, you know, we won't spend any time with the feuding going on between the most powerful man in the world and the richest man in the world. They can kind of run off and do their thing. But let's stay in the HR sandbox.
Yep.
Let's talk about best practices in the age of DOGE. We see instances, you know, inside and outside the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area where their workforce is being impacted by the elimination of certain contracts, funding. What are some best practices for companies to be thinking about as they navigate these choppy waters in the age of DOGE?
I think I would give the same advice in the age of DOGE or at any point that there is disruption and uncertainty. It's that silence from leadership, silence in the hallways, that breeds fear. In the absence of information, people make stuff up. Their heads start going, and it's not always a good place
Right.
inside what people are thinking about. So transparency, consistency, compassion are your best retention tools.
Sure.
I think I mentioned to you, Seth, I mean, I do not currently have any active clients that are being impacted directly by DOGE. I have but all of them are being impacted by some of the other EOs,
Sure.
but I don't have government clients right now. And so, but it is the same. Your culture either can fracture or it's your glue. And so if you're, as a leader, if you're not talking, if you're not being fair and sharing information, people, that causes concern.
Communication is key.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Communication is key. Keeping those values visible.
Right.
It's not just about what the decisions are, but sometimes how you show up and explain how decisions got made. And, you know, in our prep, I said this to you. It's not about the politics of whether we agree or disagree with what DOGE is doing at all. It really is about thinking about the long term of your business and the long term of your employees.
Sure.
Those who may be departing through no issue or fault or performance issues of their own,
Right.
and those who are staying. And how do you want to show up for them? And how do you protect what your people, what you've built, your
Yeah.
culture? And that's being intentional, being deliberate about how you communicate. That is certainly in the time of DOGE, but that's
Yeah.
actually good advice for any time.
Across the board. Yeah, you know, communication is key, and also consistency is
Yes.
key. Consistency of messaging, consistency of treatment, consistency also, unfortunately, of separations. We've had clients that have been in a difficult spot where certain people want to be treated differently from a separation and benefit standpoint. And you know, that's a tough call. That really is a tough call, because when you do that, you might lay yourself open to discrimination, claims of disparate treatment, and it is very difficult. There are also HR issues that we've seen come up from time to time about, you know, maybe doing a furlough instead of a layoff, and maybe letting somebody sit on the bench for a little while, having a paid leave pool that people can donate to give someone a little bit more time on the bench. So, you know, certainly I'm sure that we'll see these issues become exacerbated, but hopefully, you know, some of the winds of change will maybe die down a little bit as we get further into the year. I'd like to make sure that we have enough time to capture one other topic, because I find this to be something that's really interesting, and I'd love to get your input on it. Best HR strategies in the world of M&A. You know, again, it's a world of change when you have companies that are coming together. There are people that are coming in. There are people that unfortunately are getting off-boarded. Talk to us a bit about what you view to be best considerations and best practices in the world of mergers and acquisitions.
So this is an area that I am passionate about. I do a lot of work in this area. And one of the things that I have found is that you can have the best attorneys, the best bankers, the best deal brokers, and they're all going to leave after the deal is signed. And who's left? Your people. And so not having your people strategy in place during the due diligence process, not understanding how decisions get made, what gets rewarded, what behaviors are valued, those are core components, it's not just about putting the pieces together and poof, the processes all work, or you merge your softwares.
It's not like a generic Lego set where you just kind of stuff the pieces
It is
in.
not a generic Lego set. That is
Right.
exactly right.
Right.
And so really taking the time, having someone, and no one expects the CEO to be in the weeds, but whether it's me or any other consultant, and typically it's not your internal HR leader that can be looking at it holistically from both organizations. Doing a merger or an acquisition really is, or should be, not just about blending things together, but creating better than what either had previously.
Sure.
And so looking at that externally as early in the process as possible, really thinking about your communications, recognizing that, bringing people together, there's cultural changes, there's personal impact, it's all about WIFM, what's in it for me, and explaining the why of all of this.
Right.
Don't just, back to your communication,
Sure.
back to compassion, consistency. Those 3 C's are very important. The other thing I would say is to remember, if you are in a situation where you're offboarding folks as part of a merger or acquisition, those are typically, that can be a future advocate for your organization or a future just detractor for your organization. And so treating them in an appropriate way really can have a long-term positive reputational benefit.
Talk about that a little bit. What is an example of a benefit that you see as a trend in the marketplace for people who are being offboarded that might be able to add to that goodwill?
I think outplacement has peaks and valleys, and it has peaks and valleys both when there is a layoff due to business reasons, financial reasons, as well as in the M&A space.
Right.
I am definitely seeing uptick with sellers really pushing for outplacement services. They are trying to take care of their employees who may be exiting, and offering them more coaching, more resources to help them land. The market's tough out there right now.
Especially now, right?
It is really tough.
It's tough.
And so some of those, yes, pay, yes, COBRA benefits, paying for a few months of COBRA, all of those are, of course, standard and priorities. But outplacement services, additional coaching, offering, I've had one client who has been really wonderful about tapping into their own network and really trying to make connections for people. And that's what people remember.
It's interesting that you're bringing this up because, first of all, these are not the people strategies that folks are typically thinking about in the M&A space. So this is it's really informative and really helpful that you're bringing this up, and something that I think our viewers should take just a moment to reflect on. And you're bringing me back to the way the deal is unfolding from an attorney standpoint, because when you're talking about a purchase agreement, an acquisition agreement, usually what happens is the people in the legal world kind of get together, and you have the due diligence teams, you've got the financial due diligence folks, and you've got the legal beagles, and they exchange the purchase agreement, but they spend more time looking at an indemnification clause that may or may not ever occur, but not thinking about the people strategy. And sometimes what happens is that the people literally kind of get tucked into the back end because the lawyers say, well, okay, so where are the exhibits? Schedule of assets to be transferred, schedule of contracts to be transferred, schedule.
Who's got the golden handcuffs? Who has bonuses that are this? Who has that? And it's paperwork as opposed to human beings that are going to keep your business running.
Yeah, and the consistency to be able to drive revenues and to have a cost down, revenues up approach is, you're really kind of helping drill that in to my perception, because it literally sometimes becomes a little bit of an afterthought by just putting, a schedule on the back of a transactional document. But what you're saying is you really have to take a broader, more comprehensive view to that.
I will just say that there is an employment attorney who brought me in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, there's a transactional attorney who brought me in to a deal
Okay.
where we were really looking at their people strategy, and it was just my job to poke the bear a little bit, if you will, and to be like, psst, do you know this? Did you ask some more questions about this?
Communicate with your team.
Communicate with your team.
Yeah.
Also, communicate with the buyer. You're not going to have, I'm realistic. It's about the deal.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go out for dinner after you've spent a day together with a potential buyer, start asking some questions. Ask some questions about what it's like to work there.
Yeah.
See what kind of answers you get. And so I was helping a seller in this particular case to really understand not just the financial motivation, but actually what was life going to be like?
Yeah.
And it was a wildly successful acquisition. There is some data. McKinsey, Deloitte has some great data that says that about 70 to 75% of deals actually do not hit their ROI target. And of those 75, about 90% of the reason why, when you ask the CEOs,
Right.
it's because of cultural incompatibility. It's not because the financials didn't come together properly. It's not because
Right.
the process or the software
Or the financial
line
due diligence team couldn't fill the
couldn't
data
do
room
it.
with all of the financial statements and all that
No.
dry stuff. Yeah.
No, it's because the people
Right.
weren't on board, didn't understand, had different values, weren't told the same thing.
Yeah.
Whatever the case may
Pre
be.
and post closing, right? I mean, even having the
Absolutely.
conversation happen well after the closing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these are really some interesting points, and it just, you're driving home the point that the people are the connective tissue of the organization.
Yes.
And if you don't have people who are aligned in a communicating environment, the deal's not going to work. Or at least the statistics show that it's not in your favor. I wish we had more time.
Yes.
We'll have to continue this conversation. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. And
Seth.
thanks for joining us on this podcast with this really interesting conversation. Take care.